Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, May 27th, 2013, Memorial Day, the day when we're supposed to remember all those soldiers who perished in these various wars throughout history, and instead, just looking at the corporate media, it seems to be a celebration of the glorification of war, and they're running all these old war movies that war is cool and war is great, and if you should get yourself killed in one of these wars for the bankers, they'll make a big deal about your dead body after it's all over, which I don't think is really much of a comfort for anybody. And that's really what it is. We're not memorializing anybody. We're glorifying war and obviously current conditions, political situations. Yeah, that's what they want to do. They're out there to convince young people, yes, this is a cool thing to do, and you'll be famous, and we'll build monuments to you, which is kind of weird because apparently under sequestration and austerity and the rest of it, our existing war memorials are falling into ruin. They're not being maintained. That's okay, though. We're going to have a new world war, and we're going to have all kinds of new war memorials with which to propagandize our children. So those old, crumbling war memorials, they can go away because they've served their purpose here. Now, over this last weekend, the firestorm of controversy over Adam Kokesh and his planned marches into all 50 state capitals and Washington, D.C. on July 4th. And Kokesh himself is now calling this an armed revolution. And the controversy is just boiling up about this. They're trying to basically convince as many useful idiots to march behind Kokesh with loaded guns into the seats of power to try and make whatever point Kokesh is making. And I think the agenda is very obvious, to manufacture the illusion of a tiny armed revolution that the U.S. government can brutally put down in order to discourage all Americans from standing up at the same time in a revolt the U.S. government couldn't possibly hope to deal with. So that's the scam. Create a tiny revolution to be crushed in order to discourage a larger general revolution that might not be controlled here. Still getting signatures into our online petition. Apparently it's been picked up and posted some other places as well. And more and more information continues to surface about Adam Kokesh. Over the weekend it came out that the website freeadamkokesh.com was created 6 days before he was arrested at the marijuana rally, and further underscores the fact this is all an orchestrated public relations campaign. His arrest at the rally, and by the way, the felony charges were dropped and he was released last Friday. It was just a publicity builder to try and give him the reputation of being anti-establishment and a threat to the government, which is nonsense. If he was really a threat to the government, they would have kept the felony charges and thrown him in jail. Instead, they just say, oh, we're dropping all the charges, go on out, hit the talk show circuit, get out there, keep on encouraging people to march into Washington, D.C. on July 4th because we're ready to deal with that. Now, the Kokesh propagandists are out there trying to backpedal from this embarrassing revelation by claiming that the Free Adam Kokesh website was actually being created in advance of the July 4th march, which tells us right there and then, if we accept that story, then Kokesh is intending, he is planning a confrontation which will lead to his arrest. So either way, whether it's ahead of the marijuana rally arrest or ahead of July 4th, it shows an intention to turn these marches into a violent confrontation that will be used to demonize all gun owners and Second Amendment supporters across the country. And my petition and I have come under absolutely withering attack that we're cowards, that we're anti-Semites, that we're trying to stop Kokesh's march. We're not trying to do that at all. All we're saying is those gun owners and Second Amendment supporters who do not think this is a good idea need to be as vocal about it as they can in the next 6 weeks. I'm going to take a break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is in our control room on this holiday Monday, so when you call in, tell him thank you for being willing to give up his holiday in order to keep the truth going out to the American people. Little program reminder, in our third hour today, Richard Mack is going to be calling in to talk about the progress for the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers of America Convention, which is coming up here next week. So we're going to be talking about that as well. Now, getting back to Adam Kokesh, As you're probably already aware, information has surfaced that when Kokesh was in the military, he worked with a group that basically was involved in manipulating public opinion. He is a trained propaganda officer, and it basically came out that at one time on Adam's own Facebook page, he listed as his employer Organizing for Action. This is the Obama group. He was working for Obama and Organizing for Action during the campaign. It was all about Obama's election. Since then, it has been retasked as taking point in the grassroots gun grab, the anti-gun agenda. This is Obama's anti-gun grassroots organization, and Kokesh did list it as his employer on his Facebook page. That, of course, has since been Orwellized once that became public here. But I do think we're gaining ground on this. Oath Keepers has now issued a statement saying they do not endorse Adam's march. Their analysis is pretty much along the lines of mine. It is a pointless, reckless provocation that can only serve the government's gun grabber agenda. And so they're basically backing away and saying it is tactically wrong, it is strategically wrong, it is politically wrong, and they want no part of it. We're seeing other articles appear. This one over at Blacklisted News. Adam Kokesh's planned July 4th open carry march appears to be a honeypot of controlled opposition. They're saying exactly the same thing I am. This is being set up to give the government an opportunity to cause a violent confrontation which will be used to demonize gun owners and Second Amendment supporters all across the country. And we cannot stop Kokesh and his useful idiots from doing what they're going to do. What we can do is pull the rug out from under the propaganda value of a violent confrontation by standing up over the next 6 weeks and just keep saying the same thing over and over again. Adam Kokesh does not speak for all gun owners. Adam Kokesh does not act for all gun owners. Adam Kokesh and his marchers are a tiny, tiny, fringe, dangerous minority that do not represent the vast majority of American gun owners and Second Amendment supporters. And we need to keep getting that message out and as public as much as we can over the next 6 weeks, so that if indeed something bad happens on the 4th of July, the American people will have already been told it doesn't represent all gun owners, and the propaganda value of this stunt will be undermined. And that is really the goal of our coverage of the story and our online petition here. Now, speaking of petitions and rallies, over this weekend, of course, millions, literally millions of people around the world marched against Monsanto. We had a march here in Honolulu. We had another one down on Maui. I was not able to get to the one in Honolulu because of a scheduling conflict and a car breakdown. You know, minor thing, had to be replaced, but it did keep me sort of pinned to the home court, so I didn't get down there. But a lot of people sending in pictures, a lot of coverage all over the place in the independent media, not too much in the corporate media for some strange, bizarre reason. But it was a huge, huge march. Now, Monsanto has basically, they have acquired a major interest in the Blackwater or XE, or whatever they're calling themselves this week, this paramilitary group, and Monsanto is now using them to track anti-GMO activists and protesters around the world. In other words, this is a private mercenary army with guns who Monsanto as a public corporation is using to go after those who question the safety of their GMO product. And as we know, every day goes by, there's another report that comes out. Last week, they were talking about how this Bt toxin, which is the toxin produced by Monsanto's crops, it's inside the food. You cannot wash it off. It's now been demonstrated to kill human kidney cells. And Monsanto still wants to force it out there. We're seeing all of these corporate government efforts to crush out organic farming or raw milk production. The new model of American business is that anything you can grow on your own is now illegal, and you will be mandated to eat this corporate scientifically produced crap because it makes them a lot of money. And you're not allowed to know what's in there. You're not allowed to have a choice. You're not even allowed to know if GMO content is in there, if Monsanto has its way. We put up an article on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com listing Monsanto's financial contributions to U.S. House and Senate candidates. And, of course, what they're doing is donating to both Republicans and Democrats so they can completely bypass the will of the people in the elections. It doesn't matter who wins the election. Whoever wins is going to be beholden to Monsanto, which is why last week we had the Senate basically voting through, I think it was added as an amendment to the Farm Bill, a ban on states requiring GMO labeling. After the close call out in California with Prop 37, Monsanto decided to go right to the top and make it illegal for the states to demand GMO labeling on their food and their on products sold in the store. Now, whether that's going to stand or not remains to be seen. I think there are serious constitutional issues with the idea of the federal government telling the states that they cannot report on the presence of potentially harmful content in the food that they are buying and consuming. The New York legislature is considering a bill requiring labels for genetically modified food. Monsanto will be going in there with all their lobbyists and all their bribe money to try and defeat it, and so far they have succeeded because Monsanto has a huge amount of money and political power that they will use to enforce their new model of you will eat what we make for you, you will not grow your own, and you will like it. So we're heading into a states' rights versus federal control conflict that's going to wind up in the United States Supreme Court. Apparently there was another scandal last week where somebody found some bees, honeybees, that were immune to the Bt toxin. A lot of people have wondered if the Bt toxin in crops or the genetically modified pollen produced by Monsanto's products are behind the bee colony collapse disorder. As you know, the honeybee population is being devastated, and without honeybees, natural organic farming becomes prohibitively difficult to do. And more than a few people have asked if maybe that was Monsanto's intention. By putting out something that destroys honeybees, they guarantee market monopoly. Organic natural farming will become extinct, and we will all be dependent on Monsanto's genetically manufactured products. And so now we're finding out that scientists uncovered a bee population that seemed to have evolved an immunity to Bt toxin. Apparently, those bees were confiscated and destroyed, which I think indicates something very nefarious at work here. Remember what I said before. Enforced dependency is slavery. That's what Britain did to the American colonies. You were forced to be dependent on the Bank of England for your currency. You were forced to be dependent on the British East India Company for all imports. And that's why when they fought the American Revolution and they celebrate July 4th, they don't call it Freedom Day or We Beat the British Day. They call it Independence Day, the day when Americans were no longer required to be dependent on a private central bank or specific corporations for the products they wanted to buy. And that's where we are right now. Now, last week there was a very ugly incident down in Florida. A gentleman by the name of Ibrahim Todashev was gunned down by the FBI when they went to interview him at midnight at his home. He'd been interviewed before several times, no problem. And then the FBI went down there, claimed that he had tried to attack them with a knife, and they shot him dead. And then they basically came out and said, well, all of a sudden at that midnight interview, Ibrahim Todashev had confessed to all kinds of horrible, terrible things. But golly gee shuckies, just before he was going to sign the confession, they had this altercation where he had to be killed. Now the FBI has retracted the story that Ibrahim Todashev attacked them, because there were also some Massachusetts police officers with them who apparently aren't willing to go along with that story. And so now they're saying they don't know why the FBI agents shot this guy just as he was about to sign this confession they had brought him to sign. Well, I think the most logical conclusion has to be that the FBI just crafted this confession to tie Ibrahim in with all these other things to try and keep selling the case that the Tsarnaev brothers are guilty of all kinds of horrible things and no right-thinking American ought to be looking at the inconsistencies in the story. And Ibrahim refused to sign the confession, and they were trying to browbeat him into it, And that's what triggered the altercation that resulted in his shooting death. And so now the FBI is trying to say he was going to confess, he really was, but he died before he could sign the confession. Well, an unsigned confession is completely worthless. Certainly in a court of law, certainly in the public opinion, and given the FBI's other actions throughout their history. I think we're looking at another attempt to manufacture testimony, only this one blew up in their face. And remember, what started me on this path in 1994 was discovering evidence of the FBI fraudulently manufacturing testimony in the death of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. So, been there, done that, don't want the t-shirt, we will be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to the show here, and this of course is our Memorial Day show, which is the day when the banksters who start all these wars act like they're really regretful over all the people they've killed and maimed over the last few hundred years. And of course it's very, very insincere, especially as we find out our current war memorials are not being maintained, and they're starting to crack and fall apart. And I know there's a huge problem down here in Pearl Harbor where the remains of the Arizona are corroding away, and the tanks are still full of fuel, and there's always a big, huge oil slick coming out of that. Nobody wants to spend the money to drill into the wreck and pump out the remains of the fuel for the sake of the environment, but by golly, they're going to hit you with a carbon tax to save planet Earth from all this evil stuff. Interesting story just came across my desk. Apparently, Friday, Charles Kokesh, this is Adam Kokesh's father, and he's been in a lot of trouble for his financial skullduggery, and apparently he got arrested. He was indicted by a federal grand jury in Pensacola, Florida, for violating the Endangered Species Act by selling 2 elephant tusks. And basically it's a case of getting around the rules. Kokesh legally imported a sport-hunted elephant trophy from the African country of Namibia. Then he sawed off the tusks and sold them to a buyer in Florida for $8,000 to be paid with a combination of currency and guns. So this is Adam Kokesh's father, not exactly a moral individual here, and it may well be that Adam Kokesh is being pressured to move forward with this false flag confrontation on July 4th with the promise that his father will be let off the hook for many of his illegal actions. I know he's currently under investigation by the Securities Exchange Commission. The federal government could say, we'll simply make those problems go away. I mean, they certainly made Adam's own problems go away. Last Friday, they dropped all those felony charges. If Kokesh was really perceived as a threat and a danger to the government, and the government didn't want the march to go forward, they would have simply continued to hold him on those felony charges. But instead, the felony charges went away, which means Adam Kokesh can still legally own firearms, and they kicked him loose. Which just tells you that whole drug arrest was a publicity stunt to sell the brand, to sell Kokesh as a counterculture political dissident leader. He's being manufactured, you know, right from the start here. All right, I'm going to talk about the economy a little bit because obviously that continues to be a major story. Over at Investment Watch blog, they have an article that absolutely is bang spot on. It is simply impossible for any central bank to exit their loose money policies without triggering a market crash. And I've been saying this all along. What started out as a temporary measure to keep the stock market propped up, to use as a political banner, to keep the stock market propped up, to discourage investors from leaving the stock market and buying physical gold and silver, Republic Trading Group, plug, where they just the Federal Reserve creates $85 billion a month, and they're buying off all these failed mortgage-backed securities from the banks and dumping them on the American people. And now these Wall Street firms take that money and they plow it into the stock market to keep that stock index as high as they possibly can. And now that they own huge blocks of that inflated stock on their balance sheets, now they're stuck. They can't stop what they're doing, or the whole thing will come crashing down. And so this article from Investment Watch blog is absolutely confirming that. Now, there's another interesting article. This came from 1800politics.com, where the Chinese economic slowdown is having a global impact. And they're starting out there, the Chinese economic slowdown has shaken many of the country's stocks as well as foreign companies. In other words, this is a China bash. They want to blame China for the global economic downturn. It's not the fault of the private central bankers who trapped their enslaved nations in unpayable debt and paralyzed their economies by siphoning off way too much currency from general circulation. China's manufacturing is indeed slowing down, but it's slowing down because their primary customers are the United States of America and Europe. And all these countries are right now in economic paralysis caused by the debt created by private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. Now, I mentioned this on Friday, but I want to get back to it again because it's important to keep in mind. A study of sequestration, all of these cuts to public spending, shows that 40% of Americans are hit by the cuts one way or the other. And, of course, the rest of America are being nailed by the Feds inflating the value of the dollar away. And the only reason we're not seeing more inflation-driven price increases for food and gasoline is because most of that newly created money is being taken by Wall Street. Wall Street's functioning as a cash sink, and they plow it into the stock market and their various other Ponzi games, gambling activities. But eventually, it's got to collapse. There's no question. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call here. I hope I pronounced this correctly. Rathiest and Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
It's the Rathiest.
Rathiest.
Yes, that's a nickname. My friends, I'm a big atheist, and so my friends call me the Rathiest.
Okay, that's good. I like that. You know, from one non-believer to another.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm lucky. It's a paid holiday for me, so I appreciate you guys working and taking my phone call. And I'm a big podcast fan, so I'm glad to get to call in live here. So, but I had a couple of economic questions that came up, and I wasn't be able to answer, and I was hoping you might be able to. On these mortgage-backed securities, they're sold as an insurance policy.
No, you're blurring two things. The mortgage-backed securities themselves were sold as investments, and then AIG and other Wall Street firms sold credit default swaps against the mortgage-backed securities, which functioned as insurance. But because they're not regulated the way conventional insurance is, AIG and these other Wall Street firms did not have the cash reserves to make good on those credit default swaps when the mortgage-backed security bundles collapsed.
Oh, okay. You're right. I did confuse two things. But that still leads up to my question. Don't they have to renew those policies, the credit default swaps? They're not open-ended, are they? Do they have to? Are they still selling those, I guess, is what I'm saying? Credit default swaps. They
are still selling credit default swaps. There's something like $90 trillion worth of them sold against Europe's debt, which is why Ben Bernanke has sent $1 trillion of these newly created U.S. dollars to the banks in Europe to keep them from collapsing, because that would trigger that derivatives firestorm. As far as how the credit default swaps themselves are sold, I don't know if it's a one-time fee for the life of the investment, or if there are periodic premiums that must be paid. And obviously, if you're holding one of these credit default swaps at a time when it looks like so many of these European banks and nations might actually default, I'd certainly be keeping up on those premiums. I don't know the exact mechanism about how these are dealt, and there may be wide variance. Again, it is a completely unregulated financial process.
Okay, so it's muddied, and it sounds like a big. I don't have any money in there, so, but anyway, you did help clarify some of that up. Okay, then the other economics question. When I first started working years ago, I'm in my 50s. It was Social Security withholding.
Yes.
At some point, it became Social Security tax. When and how did they? Because now everybody's check says Social Security tax. It doesn't say withholding anymore.
Well, it's a change in the label. Functionally, it is, the Social Security system has not changed at all, but they've changed the phrase because when it was back where withholding, American workers expected to get back when they retired at least as much as they paid in, plus whatever profit from the investment of that capital by the government was going to generate. Now that we're in a generation where what you get back from Social Security is considerably less than you paid in, they just changed the wording on the payroll stubs to simply say tax. To make it look like whatever you're paying in belongs to the government and they can administer it as they choose, but of course that's a complete lie. That is your money that was paid into the Social Security Trust Fund that we trusted the government to hold, to invest, to grow in order to help you with your retirement. Social Security has been looted repeatedly, especially during the Clinton years, to balance the federal budget and keep it in the black. And there's nothing in the Social Security Trust Fund right now but a bunch of Treasury bonds, which the government cannot make good on. The U.S. government has already technically entered into a state of default against the American worker. And they chose to do that because they see the American worker as the least likely group to cause them any kind of trouble in terms of the government's credit rating or coming in and declaring default and saying, okay, we own the Lincoln Memorial now.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. Yeah, you do a great job, and I feel like I'm a well-informed voter because of your show and Republic Broadcasting. I did send a little money your way, Republic's way, so keep up the great work, and I'm out here to listen to the podcast, even though I can't listen to the radio at work. I come home and download the podcast, and I'm truly grateful for your podcast.
All right, well, thank you very much, and of course that's why we put the podcasts out there, is we understand that a great many people are working during our regularly scheduled broadcast, and obviously we want to get the message out there, and that's why the podcasts are available for free for 24 hours after every single show. And again, thank you very much for those kind words about Republic Broadcasting, and thank you for your donation, because again, to reiterate what I was saying last week, RBN does not get any corporate sponsorship. We are not getting huge checks with lots of zeros in there from non-governmental organizations with very shady backgrounds and roots. We are entirely supported by advertising and your donations to keep going and keep the word getting out there. A lot of other independent media, internet radio groups have vanished over the last several months for lack of funds to continue doing what they're doing. Nobody here is getting rich off of any of this stuff. And I don't need to go into the details about how our personal financial standings are deteriorating around our ears every single day. You're all going through the same thing. You don't need to hear our story. But the reality is that in order to keep Republic Broadcasting going, we do need your help. And that's why John Stadmiller had this 1,000-ounce silver drive, which I understand is still underway, and anything that you can do. If everybody listening to this show just sent in a $5 donation through PayPal to Republic Broadcasting, then we can go out and grow our network and grow our audience. We can get more on-air affiliates. And there's a fact of life about radio that many of you may not understand. The very first time I was involved in radio, and this is all the way back just out of college, I was involved with my college radio station, KSAK, and then after that I did a very short stint at a simulcast station in the San Gabriel Valley, KGRV, KBOB, playing golden oldies and back announcing. And back then, if you had a good show, the radio station would say, come on, do the show, and so forth. The current model right now is to get an on-air AM or FM affiliate, they charge you. And they figure then you will do your own advertising and you'll make money and they get a piece of the action, and they basically just rent those transmitters for the most part. And so in order to be on the air, AM or FM, anywhere in the country, and I understand we just picked up a new FM station in Texas, and we're about to get one in the Southern California area, we literally have, well, not the one in Texas, but the one in California, they charge. We have to pay them money, and the only place we can get that money is for you all helping us to get the word out there. All right, I've yacked enough about donations. We're going to go back to the phones. Chris in Las Vegas. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, aloha, Michael, and thank you for being there today, and Manny for answering the phone for you. Thought I might bring you a little more factoids regarding the alleged Social Security Trust, really the social slavery scam. It was originally formulated in 1935 in the Social Security Act under the Department of Human Resources as the Department of Agriculture as Human Resources, and it was originally conceived as a trust in tontine, Tontine, which is effectively a last man standing trust, more commonly known as a Ponzi scheme. Effectively meaning that none of the beneficiaries have any rights to anything that's contributed or volunteered into the savings trust account, purportedly, which is really, like I say, a last-man standing trust in tontine, where whoever's left at the end of the game has all the resources and nobody has any access to any of the benefits that are contributed.
Well, that's obviously the joke is on them because Social Security has been emptied repeatedly by the federal government. And Social Security wasn't actually set up to be a Ponzi scheme at the time. It has certainly become one now. But the original model, the way it was sold to the American people, was there would be money taken out of every one of your paychecks and put into the trust fund. The trust fund would be put into investments, AAA investments, because it was technically a pension fund. And out of that return, retirement benefits would be paid to the American people, equal to, if not greater than, their lifelong contributions into Social Security. Unfortunately, as various administrations began to look with covetous eyes on that pile of cash, they started dipping into it, and instead of the Social Security money being invested in revenue-generating, return-generating investments, a lot of it got siphoned off to fund various pork barrel projects and various other crony companies that wound up not making a profit at all. And, of course, the most egregious abuse of the Social Security Trust Fund happened during the Clinton administration, where Clinton literally grabbed billions and billions of dollars out of the Social Security Trust Fund, put it in the general revenue column, and spent it as general revenues. That's how he got that amazing federal budget surplus that the Democrats were crowing and bragging about. He literally looted the pension funds of working Americans to do it, and he put in all these IOUs that said, yes, it'll all be paid back at some point in the future. But you need to remember, at the time Clinton was in office, they were crowing about how the American economy was really going and it was good times. Well, if you're having to borrow money when the economic times are good, then when are you going to see better economic times with which to pay that money back? And, of course, that was the failure of thinking, or just they didn't really care because, you know, Clinton was out there saying, heck, 8 years I'm going to be gone. It's not my problem. And that's exactly what happened. And so now the Social Security Fund, all of the cash buildup that had been intentionally put in there to cover the baby boomer retirements, that cash is gone. There is nothing there but Treasury bonds, and those Treasury bonds cannot be redeemed. There's a Treasury bond bubble that has been created with all of this overprinting and bailouts and all the rest of that. There are not enough living Americans to make good on all those Treasury bonds. And that's just an absolute fact right now. So over time, because of political pressure and corruption, Social Security has become a Ponzi scheme in that there needs to be a large population of taxpaying Americans to cover the benefits that are going out to retired Americans. The problem, of course, is that after during the baby boomer surge, there was a reduction in birth rate, and there continues to be a reduction in birth rate. And that is why this pyramid scheme is going to collapse. They don't, I mean, maybe this is one of the major reasons why Obama is saying, let's make the illegals legal. We need a larger population to support this whole pyramid scheme a little bit longer, forgetting that most of those illegal immigrants coming in are not going to be strong contributors to the American economy because they're willing to work for minimum wage, and that means we're going to have that larger population, but the contributions by that population into Social Security are going to be at the absolute minimum. So that, too, is a failed consideration.
Well, I certainly agree with that premise, although I do suggest that many of those dollars and benefits that are given to these unvetted, unqualified migrant workers are being sent back to their homeland to take care of their families back there.
Yeah, that's definitely going on. It's a huge drain on what limited currency is still in circulation in the general public.
The other thing I would observe that when Rockefeller's illegitimate son, Bill Clinton, also created what was termed a nature conservancy easement, whereby the rich granted their properties and lands, including the Secretary of the Interior, Bruce Babbitt at the time, much of their lands, and these great grants of land were granted to foreign investors, private trust into these easements, and they were given great amounts of tax beneficium for the doing so, but it effectively put the national parks and other lands amongst the U.S. under the control of foreign nations, not necessarily our friends.
Well, that actually began under the administration of Richard Nixon, because remember, Richard Nixon slammed the gold convertible window shut on the Federal Reserve notes in response to France's demanding the conversion of all their Federal Reserve notes back to gold at $35 an ounce. And Nixon looked in Fort Knox, realized they didn't have anywhere near enough gold to do that. So he ended gold convertibility. And in order to support further U.S. government borrowing, at a time when people began to question whether the U.S. government had enough gold to collateralize any more borrowing, Richard Nixon decided to collateralize government borrowing using America's public lands, lands that belong to the American people, not the government. And in order to bamboozle the American public about this, he created the Environmental Protection Agency. And the Environmental Protection Agency, under various programs like Heritage Rivers and Roadless Zones and all the rest of it, started grabbing these resource-rich public lands, and in order to isolate them from the American people, you can't go in there, you can't develop them, you can't do anything, and that was what was pledged as collateral on government borrowing through the 1970s and the 1980s. And right now, almost one-third of the entire continental United States is bound up in this collateralization process. Now, because I consider that government borrowing odious debt, because they didn't use it to improve America, they used it to fight wars and build surveillance and all the rest of it. When this banking system and this government collapses, we the American people have to be prepared to stand up and say, look, you don't own those lands. We the American people own those lands, and we did not agree that they be pledged as collateral on government debt. If you agreed to this loan to the U.S. government without doing due diligence over the collateralization, that's your problem, and you're going to have to eat that loss. We, the American people, still own the United States of America. We really do. Anything else, Chris?
I agree. I agree. That's a rebuttable presumption that Americans should rebut. And I think it was Tricky Dicky who did the Coinage Act to loot the silver out of the coins also.
No, actually, that happened under the Johnson administration. Following the assassination of John F. Kennedy is when they took all the remaining silver out of our coinage and put us all completely on these gas station game tokens and ink and paper money. So that happened under Johnson.
Well, thank you for correcting me on that detail, and thank you for being there today, Michael. It's been a great conversation, and thank you for allowing me to contribute.
Well, thank you for the phone call. And getting back to the economy here, we're finding out, obviously, British and U.S. markets are closed today. Japan got hammered again last night. European markets are trending down. Meanwhile, Russia, Greece, Turkey, and various other central banks are on a gold-buying frenzy. Physical gold, not EFTs, not paper contracts. They're buying physical because they're getting ready to conduct their foreign currency exchanges without going through the dollar or the euro. And in order to do that, they have to have a foundation for their own currencies. And this trend is definitely spreading. We were talking a while back about how China and Australia are organizing for direct currency conversion, for trade without going through the dollar. Now China is in the same negotiations with New Zealand. We'll be back after these words from our sponsor. And aloha America, welcome back to the show. And a lot of people have been looking with alarm at the obvious manipulation of silver and gold prices. And what they do is, over at the London Daily Gold and Silver Fix, emphasis on the fix, and the British government is already investigating to see if the London Gold and Silver Fix was being manipulated the same way as LIBOR, and the answer is going to be, of course they are. And one of the things they do is they will blend the prices of these paper gold and silver contracts with the price of physical. And that way, by simply flooding the market with these paper contracts, they can keep the price of silver and gold down. We already know there's a gap opening up, because if you want to go out and actually buy physical right now, or even sell physical, there's a premium, an uplift. If you're dealing in physical, the numbers are actually considerably higher than the London Gold and Daily Gold and Silver Fix. Dealers are desperate to get physical because that's what customers are desperate for right now. And it's reached such a volume that the ETF sales are now being dwarfed by demand for physical from central banks, from jewelry companies, coin, bar demand. And it's rapidly becoming the majority of transactions in gold and silver are now being done in physical. People don't trust those gold and silver contracts for the simple reason so many of them have started to default. It started in Europe about 3 weeks ago, where these two banks in Europe, or rather brokerages in Europe, were not able to meet their delivery contracts for gold, and they settled for the cash value. In other words, more of this ink and paper stuff. And that's an easy out for those financial institutions. All they have to do is go to their central bank and say, give us some more of that ink and paper stuff, and we'll buy off these gold and silver contracts here. But if you're going to invest in silver and gold, and it is a good idea to do that right now, you got to go with physical. Do not buy a paper contract, because sooner or later those contracts are going to collapse. They can't keep this little scam going. And even as we've reached a point where paper, silver, and gold contracts are defaulting, and you're not seeing this covered in the financial corporate media, by the way. When we reach that, even though these contracts are already defaulting, they're issuing more and more of those contracts, trying to keep silver and gold prices suppressed so that ordinary investors will stay in the stock market, keep their money in the Wall Street investment firms, and more importantly, by artificially depressing the price, it gives the central banks and people like George Soros an opportunity to start buying physical at those artificially suppressed prices. Normally the kind of buying that we're seeing out there under the law of supply and demand, where demand is going up and supply is curtailed, the price should be going up. And the fact that it is not tells us it's all being manipulated for the benefit of the money junkies. Another reason to buy physical gold and silver, to keep it out of the hands of the central bankers and the money junkies who want it to use it to control the post-Federal Reserve private central banking crash. Got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2 here. And a story that came out over at ingeniouspress.com, looking at the actual numbers of the economy, just ignoring all of the proclamations by the federal government that everything is all hunky-dory, ignoring the corporate financial press that the economy is on its way up because the money junkies are making more money and the stock market is up. Going out and looking at the world around you. And by the way, just at the bottom of the hill, there's an entire strip mall that is now completely vacant, completely shut down. That's how bad things are out there. Right now, going by the numbers, the real numbers out there in the United States, half of the United States of America is living in poverty. Half of Americans, back in 2009, almost half of Americans had no assets at all to their name. They're renters, they're tenants, everything is basically money going out and nothing tangible coming back in. 75% of Americans are near poverty. And over at Goldman Sachs, they're cheering, "We did it! We did it! We strip-mined America's wealth and we put it in our pockets. We're doing God's work." Well, if Goldman Sachs is doing God's work, then God is a mean bastard. What can I tell you here? A federal audit found that the Baltimore City schools misused their federal stimulus funds. Remember when all this stimulus was going out, they were going to stimulate the economy. We're going to put out this money and good things will be done with it. And it turns out the Baltimore City schools spent that stimulus money on things completely unrelated to the classroom. None of that stimulus money actually improved education at all. I guess they got fancier cars for the Board of Education, or bigger offices, or new office furniture, stuff like that. But that stimulus money was supposed to stimulate the grassroots of the economy. It never got there. Now, we were talking the other day about this bridge that collapsed up in Washington State, supposedly after being hit by a truck. And by the way, bridges are designed to survive being struck by motor vehicles because it happens all the time. The fact that the bridge was brought down by this impact from a truck shows how fragile it was. And right now, engineers have deduced or analyzed that 1/3 of the bridges in the United States of America should be considered as structurally deficient. And we got more proof over that because another bridge collapsed in Missouri, supposedly because some of its support pillars were hit by debris from a nearby freight train collision. And again, bridges are designed to withstand being struck, because it happens all the time. Anybody who designs a bridge that is going to collapse the first time somebody hits something, that's not a very good design for the bridge. By the way, little tradition I learned about when I was a volunteer for the Railroad Museum in North Bend, Washington. There's a tradition when an engineer builds a railroad bridge, and the railroad bridges have to be the strongest because trains are the heaviest traffic you're going to encounter in commerce. The first time a train goes over that bridge, the bridge designer stands underneath it. And it's a tradition that goes way, way back, and it's a good way of guaranteeing it's going to be a well-designed bridge here. Now, speaking of bridges, up in San Francisco, as you know, they are doing a multi-phase project to replace the original Bay Bridge with a new span. And they've hit a bit of a snag in that the old span is now considered on the verge of collapse, but the new span can't be opened yet because there's a problem with the steel rods used to hold it together. So the old bridge is in danger of collapse through neglect. The new replacement bridge is in danger from cost cutting. Welcome to America in the 21st century of the money junkies. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Looking at the email coming in, somebody just wrote in that the reason Goldman Sachs can say they're doing God's work as they loot the nation is because their God is Satan. Could very well be. It would explain a very great deal. Except, golly, all those churches and the TV shows and the movies show that Satan is always supposed to lose. Doesn't seem to be working there on Wall Street. What can I tell you? Now, getting over to the Mideast, on Saturday, Israel's envoy to the United Nations went to the United Nations Security Council and filed an official complaint against Syria, saying that Syria is trying to incite a war with Israel. Boy, talk about a good demonstration of chutzpah. Israel has been repeatedly bombing Syria. They were sending troops and war material, hardware, across the Golan into Syria itself. Fox News actually showed a video of the Israeli troops returning from whatever mission they were on. And Israel screams, Syria is starting the war. And as I mentioned before, this is a pattern that we have seen from Israel before. Provoke, 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 provoke until you get a reaction, then scream the reaction is the initiating event and go to war. And we've seen that pattern time and time and time and time again. Been there, done that, do not want the T-shirt here. Now, Israel is now screaming that somebody has fired a rocket from Lebanon towards Israel. Look at those people. How horrible they can do that. Except, of course, they don't know where the rocket went. They can't find anywhere it hit. No damage, no deaths, no injuries. But we rest assured when Israel says that Lebanon has fired a rocket at them, we should take them at their word. And, of course, this is the day after rockets fell on Lebanon and Beirut, supposedly in response to Hezbollah's statement that they were going to support Syria's Assad against his hired mercenary army. And people were saying, well, obviously these rockets flying into Lebanon are coming from Israel, so now Israel's saying, no, 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 the rockets are coming back the other way, we just can't show you where it hit. Just like those rockets from Gaza that always seem to hit nothing but empty lots. It's a propaganda device here. Israel's out there whining and crying. They're afraid of a war of attrition in the Golan Heights, which is the beginning of Israel telling the United States, you should go fight this war for us. That's basically what they're saying. You know, you should go kill our enemies for us. And that's how Israel's been getting along for its entire existence. Israel very rarely fights its own wars. They certainly don't pay for them. You do. And their model is to trick other people into fighting Israel's wars for them. That was the motive behind the attack on the USS Liberty. Israel attacked the USS Liberty, initially blamed Egypt for it. There was a nuclear-armed U.S. strike in the air on the way to Cairo when the crew of the Liberty finally got a message out saying it was Israelis attacking them. And then Israel said, oh, mistaken identity, we thought it was a horse carrier. And President Johnson literally said, I would rather see all those sailors on the USS Liberty die than embarrass our friend in the Middle East. They were ready to write off the whole ship. There was a rescue mission in the air launched from the carrier America to protect the USS Liberty from further attacks. It was recalled on orders from the White House. Huge embarrassment. They just wanted it to go away here. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is back beating his Iranian drum. He's out there saying diplomacy and sanctions are unable to stop Iran. They're going to go on doing what they're doing. They're going to build power stations. They're going to have medical isotopes that compete with Israeli products in the world marketplace. That can't be allowed. You, the American people, should go kill Iran for us. And Netanyahu is out there saying that Iran is now attempting to build a plutonium-based bomb. And I'll tell you why this is complete, absolute nonsense. Iran's entire nuclear industry, its power station, its medical isotopes, and everything are built around a uranium-based physics model. You don't get plutonium until you have a reactor using uranium that starts to generate plutonium. And there are very strict controls on those expired fuel rods. That's what the IAEA does. So Iran doesn't even have the plutonium in any kind of a quantity, let alone building a plutonium bomb. It's just Netanyahu back out there going nuclear wolf, or nuclear duck, trying to get America to go fight a war against Israel's enemy. And what makes it very dangerous, of course, is there are entities within the United States who also have a war agenda with regard to Iran for completely different reasons. They're not worried about Iran's weapons of mass destruction. They're worried about Iran's economic power. They're worried about Iran selling their oil for currencies other than the dollar. They're worried about the fact that Iran is one of the remaining nations on earth that do not have a private central bank issuing the public currencies alone at interest. And they want to smash it, just the way they wanted to smash Germany when it broke free from its private central bank and had a government-issued value-based currency that just lit Germany's economy up. They called it the German miracle. Adolf Hitler was Time magazine's Man of the Year for this amazing economic transformation he had done in Germany that was a direct threat to the power and wealth of the private central bankers. That's the excuse behind all the wars we've seen in modern history. It's a war between banking systems, between private central banks holding populations and nations slaves to debt, and those nations trying to break free of that slavery. And the United States is on the wrong side of this moral argument. We fought a revolution to be free of private central banking, only to be sold back into it by a corrupt Congress and a corrupt president, not once but 3 times. And now we're trying to force this same form of banking that has destroyed our own nation, is now being forced on other countries at the point of an American bayonet. We are on the wrong side of this particular debate. And that's why, ultimately, I think we're going to see a collapse here. Over in San Francisco, it's a very, very bizarre story. Now, as you're probably already aware, hired hate spokesperson Pamela Geller is basically going around the country, and she's always putting up posters to inflame public opinion against the Muslims. Most of these posters contain outright fraud and fallacy and deception. And it's always said, oh, no, that's freedom of speech. She's allowed to put this stuff up there. And there are counter posters being put up now. In fact, over in San Francisco, the American Muslims for Palestine put up posters, End Apartheid Now. And apparently, the Human Rights Commission is being petitioned by the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, saying that the money that is being used for these posters ought to be confiscated and given to Jewish groups to fight anti-Semitism. Because now the new spin is the label apartheid is anti-Semitic. And it's creating intolerance against the Jewish community. Well, no, it isn't. It's creating intolerance against the government of Israel, which authors and supports this apartheid policy. But that's the new spin. Calling Israel apartheid is now considered anti-Semitic. And they're screaming at the MTA accepting anti-Israel ad money. But at the same time, if it's anti-Muslim ad money, oh, that's protected free speech under the First Amendment. And that right there is a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution. Now, over in Iran, they are starting what is being called a massive deployment of long-range missile launchers. Iran understands that at the point where Israel and or the U.S. carry out an unprovoked attack into Iran, that not only the nuclear power station, the fuel rod processing facilities, and various other aspects of Iran's peaceful, authorized by the NNPT nuclear program are going to be targeted, but at the same time, in order to forestall a potential retaliation against Israel, that their military assets will be targeted as well. It's going to have to be a blitzkrieg, all-or-nothing deal, and so Iran is now starting to deploy their long-range missile launchers all over the countryside. So they would have to be bombed individually instead of bombing a single depot where they're all stored. And so it's called a disbursement, in order to take one large attractive target and turn it into 1,000 may not be worth the trouble targets. They know what's coming. They know that sooner or later the U.S. and Israel are going to haul off on this attack because Israel and the U.S. are out of options. They can't get this war going. They've exhausted weapons of mass destruction. Nobody's listening any longer. We all understand it's all about Bretton Woods and dollarification. And right now, both Netanyahu and Obama are desperate for some kind of a major distraction from their own domestic political problems. Benghazi Gate continues to grow. More questions about that have been surfacing. IRS Gate, DOJ Gate. Obama desperately needs a distraction. And it's either going to be war with Iran, which means war with Russia, or he's going to get Kokesh to get this stupid march going into the state capitals in Washington, D.C. on the 4th, turn it into a violent confrontation, and use it to declare suspension of the Second Amendment, national emergency. We got to shut down all those pesky independent media blogs. And by the way, Obama's out there saying now that the Internet is a source of terrorism in this country. So Obama is scared out of his mind. He's backed into a corner. He's desperate. And, of course, we know that desperate politicians are the most dangerous. Now, the North Korean envoy has delivered letters to Kim Jong-un, from Kim Jong-un to Chinese President Xi, committing to new peace talks, including possible reunification of Korea. So it looks like that whole situation is cooling down from the military point of view. Going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, over in Bahrain, and you are not going to see this on the corporate media, the people of Bahrain are demanding regime change. Now, because the Bahraini government is a friend of the United States of America, because Bahrain allows the use of its ports for American naval ships to project power into the region. The U.S. government is firmly on the side of the Bahraini government as they repress their people. Have you ever noticed this double standard? The only time when we need to free a people from an evil tyrant is if the tyrant is not on board with the U.S. agenda. And we're seeing that double standard show up over there in Bahrain, where there are huge protests going on. The government is absolutely repressing their people with water cannon and chemical weapons, and the U.S. government says nothing about it because, you know, those Bahrainis, they're our friends. We can't offend them. Now, you're probably aware of this U.S. spy device that can simply sweep up all communications in an area without a warrant. Texting, cell phone traffic, everything in an area. It's just a grand snarfing tool. It grabs it all, decodes it all, makes it available for inspection without a warrant. Complete violation of the Fourth Amendment. And apparently the U.S. is now exporting this down to New Zealand, where they're going to start using it to keep an eye on their people. Now, I don't know what the laws are down in New Zealand, but I want to talk a little bit about the Fourth Amendment. The U.S. government is taking the position that the Fourth Amendment does not apply to cell phone traffic or internet traffic or text messages or any of that stuff, because they didn't exist at the time the Constitution and the Bill of Rights was being written. But you need to understand that neither did the telegraph or the telephone, and yet the presumption was the Fourth Amendment, because it was not tied to any technology of the day, is presumed to apply to telegraph and telephone messages, landline telephones. So it's completely arbitrary for the government to say, oh, the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to other forms of communication because they didn't exist in the day. That's also an argument they use on the Second Amendment. Well, the Second Amendment only, gives you the right to have muskets. And you're not allowed to have all those modern weapons that the criminals are getting from Fast and Furious. And it's just a very arbitrary way of attempting to bypass the intention of the Bill of Rights. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Mike in Maryland. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, I want to thank you for having your show today. You're a real trooper.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I don't want to change the subject, but I haven't had a chance to call into RBN or other alternative talk radio, and I just have this question, and maybe you could elucidate on this or give some insight. The Boston bombing has been covered, quite a bit on this network, as well as the Sandy Hook. People have their own ideas about what really happened there. But I just wanted to get there's one incident that occurred that, to me at least, has gone under the radar, and I for the life of me, I can't explain why, and maybe you can tell me where I'm going wrong here or if I'm right. And that is the Mother's Day shooting in New Orleans, where 19 people were killed. There were 3 shooters involved, and several news sources, said that there were 2 or 3 shooters, and yet, I haven't heard anything more about it, and I haven't even heard any coverage. Fortunately, nobody was killed, but several.
Well, that's exactly why it didn't get the coverage. It wasn't spectacular enough, and it really couldn't be used for propaganda purposes. I mean, there are shootings and stuff going on all over the country. We just had a situation in Texas where somebody was just randomly shooting from a pickup truck at people. What made Boston so newsworthy is the fact that it could be used to demonize Muslims and to fan up the terrorism and be afraid agenda. And when the corporate media is choosing what to report and not to report, it's always on the basis of how can this be used to serve a specific agenda. And if it can't be spun to serve a particular agenda, if it's the wrong class of victims, if it's the wrong class of perpetrators, it gets basically a nod and a mention, and it's quickly sent into the bit bucket in their rush to go back to reporting on Jodi Arias or something.
Well, then, I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, because I realize, you're not Karnak, you're not all-seeing and all-knowing, but do you think there's a false flag attack? There's speculation that they're gangbangers, but, if you have petty criminals who deal drugs or on the street corner, the last thing you want to do is go on a shooting rampage and potentially kill 12.5 innocent people. It doesn't make any sense. So do you think that was a false flag event, or do you think, because it makes no sense the way the mainstream media attempted, the local news at least, trying to explain it.
Well,
What's your take on it?
My take on it would be it may well have been a drug gang turf shooting, because we used to see those all the time in Los Angeles, and innocent bystanders were being hit. Again, there were no deaths, which reduces its newsworthiness. It could, if the shooters themselves were using their own product, if they were high on meth or something, then yeah, shooting into a crowd would make sense to them. And it could very well be that these guys were using guns that track back to Fast and Furious, and that's a good reason to drop the story. So we're going to let you go here and take a break for commercials. We'll be right back.
Okay, thanks.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And, of course, as I mentioned at the top of the program, today is May 27th. It's May 27th. June, summer is just days away. And if you are in Vermont or upstate New York, I wouldn't put that snow shovel away just yet. Because over the last couple of days, they got 30 inches of snow in May. In May. And the ski resorts are actually going to reopen. So much for this whole global warming thing here. So it's the unofficial start of summer, 3 feet of fresh snow. And I know the areas they're talking about up in the Whiteface Mountains. I used to go skiing there myself when I was a kid, but I never got to do it in May or June. You know, March was basically it. You're into March, put the skis away, put the snowshoes away. We don't have to deal with that thing. By the way, we're still seeing that we've got the carbon Nazis are out there still trying to scream that, no, the world is warming, it's getting hotter, you've got to pay a carbon tax, you've got to obey a global environmental authority. And what we have here is a bunch of scientists and institutions who sold their soul, sold their integrity, sold their science to a political agenda, and now they're trying to figure some way they can get out of this mess because Mother Nature has not cooperated with the global warming hoax. In fact, so far this year, 79% of the United States is below the normal temperature up to this point. And so all the dire warnings about global warming and rising sea levels and all the rest of it was all nonsense. It was all nonsense to trick you out of your money and your obedience. This government doesn't know any other way to govern this country other than through lies, fraud, propaganda, and deceptions. Now, over in Tuvalu, the prime minister there is trying to basically extort money out of the Western industrialized countries, claiming that they are global warming terrorists who are warming the planet and drowning his country. The only problem is sea level isn't rising at Tuvalu. In fact, careful measurements along the coast of California show the sea level has actually dropped slightly. Where is all that water going? It's freezing at the polar caps. Both the Arctic and Antarctic are above the normal ice levels for this time of year. Now, we've mentioned this before, but it's worth a repeat. The latest research out of NASA has absolutely destroyed this idea that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Greenhouses work because there is a solid pane of glass that is converting infrared into heat and then traps that heat inside the greenhouse. But the atmosphere is not a solid piece of glass, and it's got convection currents that keep everything mixed up. And a new study coming out of NASA's Langley Research Center, and that's a very cool place, I've been up there myself. It shows that carbon dioxide actually acts as a coolant in the atmosphere, and that it actually prevents solar heat from reaching the ground from the upper atmosphere. Completely devastates Al Gore and his inconvenient truth. He lied to you. He's a politician. He lied to you for your money and your obedience. He lied to you. I remember that video that we have of Al Gore saying that the temperature of the Earth's core is millions of degrees. He's not a trained scientist. He got barely passing grades in his mandatory science classes when he was in college. He's a goofball. And he's doing booga booga booga, carbon dioxide, the earth is being destroyed, you're to blame, and you will atone by giving us your money and your obedience. Now, even the BBC is finally having to admit what we have been telling you for going on 10 years now. The earth is not getting warmer. And the BBC is now trying to sort of back away gently so that their readers don't remember that the BBC was out there at the forefront of screaming about global warming and snow is a thing of the past. And so BBC ran this headline, "Climate slowdown means extreme rates of warming not as likely." So they're kind of grudgingly admitting what we have been telling you here in the independent media all along. It wasn't science. It was politics disguised as science. And they're finally admitting since 1998, there really hasn't been any warming. Gee, golly, you know. Those scientists meant well, I'm sure. No, they didn't. We have a thing in science called the golden rule of science. Whoever's got the gold is deciding the science. And Al Gore and his co-conspirators simply went out there and said, we have got all this money to give out for research grants to prove global warming. And scientists who were desperate for research grants said, yeah, I'll prove global warming, give me some money. And they took the money and they concocted a bunch of theoretical models in a computer. And they said, this proves global warming. Now, little reminder, a computer model can't predict anything. A computer model merely shows you the outcome of its initial assumptions, and if those assumptions are wrong, the computer model will come up with completely wrong results, and that's exactly what happened here. I remember not too long ago when one of the stars of the global warming hysteria was challenged on the fact that the real-world data wasn't matching the computer model. And the scientists came back and said, we're not interested in the real-world data. We're relying on our computer models to come up with the conclusions we're going to give you. Remember when we caught them placing temperature sensing stations in the outflow of building air conditioners? We found one that was right next to a trash incinerator. These things were being set up to generate the numbers to support the agenda. Over the last several years, the temperature measuring stations in rural areas have been shut down, where it's cooler. And more focus is on these temperature measuring stations inside cities, where you have what's called the heat island effect, because cities are very warm. They generate a lot of heat, not the least of which is that every building is air conditioned, pumping the heat that's inside the building to the outside. And if you look at the sum total of the space inside the buildings being taken down 5 or 10 degrees cooler, it stands to reason a similar volume of air outside the buildings is being driven up in temperature by the same amount. And that's what these temperature measuring stations were measuring. The pumping of heat from inside buildings to the outside. And that's why they got the numbers they wanted. But again, looking at upstate New York and Vermont right now, obviously what these climatologists came up with didn't match the real world. Over in the European Union, they're starting to pull the plug on all of these costly regulatory complex measures to fight global warming. They finally figured out it was a load of nonsense right from the start. Anytime somebody says there's no such thing as a government conspiracy, you show them the global warming hoax, because this involved notable academics who got lots of gold plaques on the wall to convince you that you should listen to them. It involved NASA, NOAA, Hadley Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, Penn State, Michael Mann. They were all complicit in this hoax to defraud you of carbon tax money to keep themselves very, very rich, or at least funded for their research. Because Al Gore was very generous. As the money poured in from his carbon trading scam in Europe, he was very generous about writing out checks to those scientists and universities who would support his claims. So yeah, that was a conspiracy. Multiple governments, multiple agencies, multiple individuals all conspired together to guilt you out of tax money by claiming the world was getting warmer, that it was all the fault of carbon dioxide, and you were to blame, and you would have to atone for it. And starting with the fact that the world is not getting warmer, it is provably, demonstrably getting colder, and the fact that the global warming cult insisted it was all the result of humans, and that big, giant, bright thing up in the sky called the sun had nothing whatsoever to do with driving climate here on planet Earth. It was absurd from the beginning, and you need to remember, scientific method is a valuable tool for finding out what is the truth about the world. But individual scientists are just as corruptible as individual politicians or individual members of the clergy. They just put on that white lab coat in the hope that you will see it as a sign of instant respectability and trust. And you shouldn't. You absolutely should not. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, 8 explorers drove from Russia to Canada across the North Pole. So much for this idea that there's an ice-free Arctic up there. And by the way, the last time the Arctic really was ice-free was the year I was born, 1952. When the submarine, the USS Skate, rendezvoused with the USS Sea Dragon at the North Pole, and it was open water. So it's just all complete nonsense. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Don in Ohio. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Don, are you there?
Yeah, I am. I didn't hear a beep. So, yeah, I was just thinking that a lot of people, you know, they go through their days, you know, the Memorial Day and stuff like that. I'm trying to spit it out right now. And a lot of times you forget about all the people that have been killed by America, you know, in these false flag events and stuff like that. I mean, from all the way back from, remember, the Maine, we got Tonkin, a lot of
Pearl Harbor.
Innocent people. That's what we should be thinking about, is all these people. And the second thought is, listeners out there, please donate to RBN. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, I second that motion, and thank you for the mention on that. The whole push of the corporate media and the government right now is to lionize and idolize those people who got killed in these wars for the bankers. But there are other victims of wars, like the average of 50 innocent bystanders who are killed in every one of these drone strikes that Obama sends off. We know that our government gladly sacrifices the lives of their own service people as pawns in global politics, whether it's the crewman of the USS Liberty or the crewman of the USS Arizona. Because we now know, because of documents declassified in 1994, Roosevelt knew the Japanese were coming. He deliberately goaded them into the attack. He literally ordered an ongoing U.S. Navy exercise north of Oahu that was right in the path of the oncoming Japanese fleet. Roosevelt directly ordered the Admiral, Kimmel, to bring that task force back to Pearl Harbor, to not spoil the surprise. Roosevelt said, we need dead bodies in Pearl Harbor to anger Americans into going to war against Japan as the back door to getting the U.S. into the war against Hitler and his state bank and his value-based currency. So if we're going to remember wars today, we need to remember all aspects of wars. And that reminds me, I probably ought to put up Mark Twain's The War Prayer. I'll probably do that on this next commercial break. And also, if you go over to whatreallyhappened.com, I reprised 2 of my wife's music videos, Kyrie Eleison and In Times of War. And you may want to take a look at those. And I'm not just saying that because I love my wife and I love her music. These are videos that I think tell an important side about war remembrance that we should remember. And the spin from the corporate media is war is glorious, war is great, war is always wonderful and beyond question, but it isn't. I don't know if you've ever seen the classic movie All Quiet on the Western Front, and it is considered a film classic. And it starts with this young man in a school, and the teacher is saying, oh, yes, you've got no more noble ambition than to grow up and join the military and serve our government in the wars. And so this young man leaves school, and he joins the military, and he confronts what war really is. Not what it's advertised to be, what it really is. And at the end of the movie, he comes back to that same classroom where the same teacher is talking to yet more young people about how great war is. And he comes on in and he explains to the kids, it isn't what this guy in the front of the classroom is teaching you. It's, it's death and it's hardship and it's murder, and you're going to do things that you're not going to be happy with. And you need to understand that before you go in. There was an article we put up earlier on whatreallyhappened.com where the government has apparently been using some very serious medication on our troops to help them cope with the fact that they understand they're not there to defend the United States of America. They're invading, conquering hordes, and it does not sit well with the moral code they were raised with. Apparently, along with the SSRIs, which are highly addictive, they're using this medication, I think it's called benzodiazepine. I may be mispronouncing that, but the whole point of this medication is it causes short-term memory loss. And they figure if you've just done something really horrible, they dose you with this medication, and you just get this amnesia for the last 48 hours, so that what you did does not stay with you as you go forward into life. Now they're discovering it doesn't really work all that well. It just shoves the memories down, and they'll surface much, much later when you're back at home. And it's no longer the Army's problem to deal with. So they're rethinking that whole situation. Alrighty, getting back to global warming. This is coming out of the Daily Express in Great Britain, where scientists are now saying that, well, looks like the Earth may be heading for another ice age. And yeah, all the signs are out there saying we're heading into a new solar minimum, a new Maunder minimum. And to judge from upstate New York and Vermont, yeah, we're definitely not going in the direction Al Gore told us we were going in. And it's just a reminder, if you go back and you look at climate science, going back 50 years, They're always predicting a new ice age or new horrible global warming, and they flip back and forth because they don't really know what they're doing. It's just they're going to jump onto whatever bandwagon gets the media attention and funding at the time. Now, I'm a great supporter of science and scientific method, but I need to underscore that by saying that science, when it is funded by government and corporations, is not to be taken at face value or trusted, because agenda-driven science is no more trustworthy than news coming from the corporate media. Science has become the new priesthood. People around the world are turning away from the church saying you should believe this, but they're still quite gullible when the corporate media says, this scientist says you should believe this. And you shouldn't believe scientists anymore than you believe that guy in that child molester in the funny robes at the front of the church, or a politician in his very expensive clothing, or bankers as a class. You shouldn't trust. You shouldn't believe. You should become your own best analyst. You should embrace scientific method for your own thought processes. You should be skeptical. You should abandon all belief, because belief is a method of enslavement. Once you are conditioned to believe in something, those who control and shape the beliefs control you. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And speaking of being enslaved to belief, the Evangelical Family Research Council has sent out a massive email blitz or paper letter blitz, basically saying that the recent tornadoes that struck Oklahoma are caused by God as punishment for people not coming to church. And I know it sounds like it's a parody from The Onion, but it is very, very real. That if you don't start coming to church and throwing your money in the collection plate, and if you don't stop talking about all that child sexual molestation thing, there'll be more natural disasters hitting the United States of America. And I don't think the Evangelical Family Research Council understands the image they're putting out is of Jesus holding a lightning bolt to the head of a 4th grade girl and saying, you grovel before me or the kid gets it. So, we live in a nation where truth and facts really don't seem to be a high priority. Everything is serving whatever agenda one is allied to. And everything that comes along, whether you're in the clergy or politics or law or finance, everything that happens, the first thought is, how do I use this to push my agenda? And when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, we have to enshrine truth above all. We have to make truth an automatic virtue and presumption. And we have to make lying the ultimate crime by anybody in public office, anybody in the corporate media. Remember that Fox synthetic bovine growth hormone lawsuit, another one of Monsanto's many evils, I might add, where the courts ruled that because there is no law in the United States of America requiring corporate media to tell the truth to the public, the corporate media can legally order their prostitutes to lie to the public, and if the prostitutes refuse, they can be fired. And that tells you all you need to know about the corporate media. One last story here before we hit the top of the hour, and Sheriff Richard Mack. Remember a while back when they tried, the corporations tried to get around the growing upset over high fructose corn syrup by claiming it's just like sugar, and they wanted to rename it to corn sugar, and they mounted a huge ad campaign that you cannot tell the difference, which fell flat on its face because for certain individuals like yours truly, there is a difference. I can eat regular plant sugar, cane sugar, beet sugar, without a problem. If I get a dose of fructose, I go right into hypoglycemia. So there is clearly a difference. And I wonder how many people are now taking prescription medications for hypoglycemia, not realizing it's the high fructose corn syrup in their food and soft drink that is the real cause of the problem. But hey, everybody's making money, so who cares? The latest scam coming down from the food corporations is now they want to rename aspartame. And they want to market it as a natural sweetener. It is anything but. They're going to call it amino sweet. So they're going to sell you something they know is bad, they're just going to rename it. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. We are still waiting to connect with Sheriff Richard Mack, and we'll have him on just as soon as he does connect. Meanwhile, kind of a bizarre story out there. Billy Joel is out there trying to explain away his behavior by saying that he suffers from depression caused by 9/11 and not by alcohol. And he says that this depression caused his multiple car accidents. In other words, he's out there, he's got a known issue with drinking, he's been in car accidents, and he's out there saying, no, the alcohol didn't cause the car accidents, my depression from 9/11 did. I just lost all respect for Billy Joel because of that statement. But it's a lame excuse, but if it gets him off the hook for drunk driving, you know, maybe we all ought to use it this holiday weekend. You know, how come you're driving up on that sidewalk? Oh, I'm so depressed about 9/11 and Boston, and the rest of it really had nothing to do with all the alcohol in my system. Anyway. Let's see. Going to talk a little bit about the gun grabbers. And there's been another episode where a 3D printed gun exploded during testing by the Australian police. And again, the idea of printable guns I support as First and Second Amendment issues, but on the practical level, these are not useful weapons. They really aren't. They're a curiosity. They're a curiosity. And maybe somewhere down in the future, when 3D printing with metals becomes commercially viable and affordable to ordinary people, it'll be a different story. But right now, a gun that explodes when you use it is exactly the kind of gun the government hopes that you are going to be using. All right, joining us on the air right now is Sheriff Richard Mack. And Richard, aloha, welcome to the show. How are things going with your convention?
Well, it's shaping up really nicely, actually. I just spoke, since I last saw you, I spoke in Albany, New York, and then just recently in Philadelphia at the Independence Hall, and it was quite a thrill. And I told everybody, I said, the CSPOA and our entire convention is not about moving forward, but really finding the solution. If we're going to find the solution, it's behind us. And when I pointed behind me, I was pointing right at Independence Hall. Mm-hmm. And that really is the symbolism that signifies and clarifies where the solution is. The further we move forward, the further we're moving away from our Constitution and our foundation. We've got to get back to the basics. We've got to get back to the fundamentals. We've got to get back to the principles that the Founding Fathers established, or we're dead. That's it. This country is done. And at the CSPOA, at our convention, we're going to make that clear that there is a solution to this, that we can take back America, that we can go back to our Constitution. We have sheriffs and other public officials already doing it. That's what I like about this, Michael. It's not pie in the sky dream talking. This is something that's already happening. And all we have to do is make it bigger, better, and faster. And that's what our convention is all about doing. So far, we have a little over 200 people coming. We have sheriffs from all over the country. We've got sheriffs from California, Oregon, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, New York. I'm really thrilled with some of the responses we're getting from New York sheriffs.
All right, we're going to have to take a quick break for commercials. Sheriff Mack, please stay with us, and we're going to come right back to you after these words from our sponsor. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Sheriff Richard Mack and his Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers of America convention here, and I want to hammer a point home right now. Sheriff Mack, your convention, your agenda is most assuredly a nonviolent one. You are seeking a peaceful way to restore the Republic. And the reason I want to hit that point very hard, of course, is because of the controversy surrounding Adam Kokesh and his call for an armed march into not only Washington, D.C., now he's added all 50 state capitals on the 4th of July, and he's already gone away from saying it's a peaceful protest, and he's calling his movement an armed revolution. I think that's extraordinarily dangerous, and you probably agree about that. But your convention and your group are looking for peaceful, nonviolent ways to restore the republic.
Yes, I would tell every one of those people that are thinking about joining Adam with that march, come to our convention first and see if there really isn't something you see there that would be a little bit more effective and a better use of your time and resources, and that we still unite in a peaceful manner to take back our freedoms and Constitution. We're already seeing some tremendous success with this. I've tried to get Adam to come and join us and see what we're doing, and I guess he has other things in mind. I consider Adam a friend of mine. I consider him a good person. But I totally disagree with this, and I just have to ask him and anybody else, what on earth could you possibly think you're going to achieve with this? And, they already put him in jail, and, what did you think was going to happen when you start talking like this? Technically, as soon as you say that you're going to do that, they can come and arrest you.
Well, they did let him go on Friday. They dropped all the felony charges, and they did let him go. Now, where and when is your convention, and where can people find out information if they want to sign up and join in and attend?
Well, one thing I would like to ask every one of your audience today, all your listeners, are you wanting a peaceful solution? If you're really serious about a peaceful solution, then I'm asking you to do one thing to help this solution get bigger, better, and faster. So attend the convention, bring your friends, tell your friends, your favorite cop to attend, your sheriff, make a donation, but do something to increase and strengthen this peaceful process. And everything about our convention is on cspoa.org, and it's May 31st. It's this coming Friday, just 4 or 5 days away now. So you can still get there. We still have a few seats. And it's at the Ameristar Hotel Casino in St. Charles, Missouri. All day this Friday, half day Saturday. Get there Thursday night. You can leave and be home by Saturday evening.
All righty. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners regarding your organization or your convention?
Well, we already have 452 sheriffs that have signed on to stand against the gun control of Barack Obama and others. We have sheriffs in Colorado and New York fighting and suing their own government to stop gun control. This is already working, folks. Let's not start attacking and going violent when we actually have a solution that's working. Let's see how this works out first. So join us in this holy cause. Let's keep it peaceful, and let's keep our heads straight, and let's join this holy cause of liberty and make it work.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement here. Right now, any act of violence is going to work to the advantage of the government itself. They're looking for an opportunity to demonize gun owners and Second Amendment supporters any way they can. And if you look back at the history of COINTELPRO operations, you will recognize that many, many times these events that are set up supposedly to make a point are in fact open doors for a propaganda coup back on the people being targeted, and I can think of no better example than the FBI's staged riot at Disneyland. This was back in 1970, where these FBI informants on all these Southern California college campuses, and they still have them to this very day. If you're a college student right now, somebody around you is an FBI informant, and these informants had infiltrated the anti-war movement and assumed positions of leadership, and they organized what was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration on Harbor Boulevard. Once the demonstration was there, these organizers led the kids inside, caused damage, took over Tom Sawyer's Island. The National Guard showed up, and the next day, it was just every newspaper in America. Those so-called peace activists were committing acts of violence against Mickey Mouse, and in a single stroke, they discredited the anti-war movement. Later that same decade, during the COINTELPRO hearings, it came out all of this was set up by the FBI using their campus informants on the orders of the Nixon White House. And so I think the danger here, of course, is regardless of whether Adam himself is legit or not, This is an ideal opportunity for government agent provocateurs to cause a violent confrontation that would be used to demonize gun owners and Second Amendment supporters across the country. We, gun owners and Second Amendment supporters who do not agree, need to be as vocal about that as we can to undermine that propaganda victory that is being planned for July 4th. And we know Oath Keepers has already disavowed Kokesh in his march. Alex Jones was supporting it. Now he's canceled out of it. We need to basically stand up and say, Kokesh does not speak for us. He does not act for us. It is just a tailor-made for a propaganda operation to attack our gun rights even further than they already have.
Yes, I agree, and I have disavowed it also.
All right. Well, that's really good to know. All right. We've got about another 5 minutes in this segment. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners?
Well, yeah. When I was in Philadelphia, I spoke with Larry Pratt. He was one of the speakers, and then keynote speaker was Alan Keyes. And I reminded Alan that, because this is the first time I'd seen him since I wrote my book, and I'd met him one other time. And I said, I quoted you in my book. And he goes, oh, yeah, what quote? And I said, I was at a meeting when you spoke to Utah where I met you. And you said, the only difference between today's slavery and the slavery of the Old South is that at least the plantation owners paid for the chain.
That's a good one. That's a great quote. That's an absolutely wonderful quote.
Especially coming from Alan Keyes. And so I told him, I showed him where I put it in my book. That was my first book, From My Cold Dead Fingers. And, you know, I compared also to what George Mason said, and I quoted him in the book too. He said, I asked her, what is the militia? It is the whole body of the people. To disarm the people is the best and most effectual way to enslave them. And so I like how, you know, in the book I compare slavery to gun control and gun control to slavery. And no free man has ever been banned the use of weapons, and that's what I'm really afraid of here. I'm afraid that Adams' stunt is going to make it worse, and whether he has provocateurs or not, the media and everybody else are going to make this a hell for the rest of us who wish to be free and be left alone. And so, folks, again, get involved with our solutions. If you're really interested and dedicated to solutions and restoring freedom in America, get involved with us. We really need your help. The only way we have these conventions and the only way we work is through donations of people, grassroots donations of people like you across the country. And you can get all our information at cspoa.org. We would love to have all of you attend. Michael, if there's any way that you can still get there, we'd love to have you come and say a few words. But man, oh man, get there if you can. Get your sheriff there. Get your peace officer friends, and you can attend as well. It's going to be an amazing event, and I believe that Alan Keyes is going to try to make it. He said he didn't know about it. He said he was going to try to make it. I'm getting him the information right now.
All right. Well, I just reprised the registration page for your convention to the top of whatreallyhappened.com, so more and more people will be able to look in on that. I would, very honestly, I would love to be there. Unfortunately, being out here in Hawaii for financial reasons, I'm not able to get to the mainland to do a lot of public speaking, even if I could put up with the TSA's constant groping of me and dropping of computers. My wife and I are talking about a move back to the mainland sometime before the end of the year, and at that point I'll be more conveniently positioned to come out and do more of this public speaking thing. Would love to be there, just not practical at this time, but I do wish you a lot of luck. I hope a lot of people will spontaneously show up at this convention of yours to seek a peaceful transition back to the constitutional republic, to push the government back into its constitutional limits, so that they serve the people and not the bankers. And again, violence only works for the government right now, so please, please do not engage in any acts of violence that can be used to castigate all of us here. Sheriff Mack, we're going to let you go here. We're almost at the commercial break, and thank you for spending time with us again today. Anytime you want to come back on the show, love to have you. Love to keep supporting those members of law enforcement who are supporters of the Constitution. We need to be seen to back them up because they're fighting a very lonely battle right now.
Absolutely. And thanks so much, Michael. Again, everybody, cspoa.org.
CSPOA.org. And I do have that link at the front of whatreallyhappened.com. All righty, we're coming up here. Thank you, Richard. We're going to let you go here. We're coming up on another commercial break. When we come back, talking about Memorial Day from the economic point of view, and the picture is not very pretty at all. So we'll be back after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get into the other news, we're going to take a phone call here from Paul in Atlanta. Aloha, Paul. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Just had a thought occur to me. For those people that are thinking about going on that march with Adam Kokesh, how about a force that would be in opposition to what he's doing, but consisted of gun rights people that show up to oppose him, not armed, but with placards saying, "We are not for this march"?
That would be a good idea, especially the part about the placards. I've had a lot of people write me suggesting I encourage people to go to the marches with camcorders to try and record what's going on, and that would be a really good idea for everybody at that is going to the marches to have cameras, camcorders, especially hidden covert ones in Bluetooth earpieces like the Luxi. That's a very wonderful device. I understand they've got a new model out now as well. My concern about additional people showing up to the march is the media will portray them as Kokesh supporters and try and...
Not if they have placards that say they're against this march.
Well, all they got to do is video them from the bottom of the placards down and say, look how many people showed up, these dangerous, violent gun owners. And the other reason why I'm not 100% in line with this idea is, should agent provocateurs start shooting, they're not going to care who they shoot. And there's a potential danger there. I think what we need to do, we've got about 6 weeks to do this, is all those people who would show up with a placard need to go out to their social media and start making the statement now, Kokesh does not support us, Kokesh does not act for us. We've got this online petition we've started. You need to take the link for that petition and send it to all your pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment groups and get them to sign it. If we can get more people to sign this petition, then Kokesh has people to show up in his march. The message is going to be very clear. He is a minority opinion among gun owners and Second Amendment supporters, and we need to not wait till July 4th and let the government and the corporate media try and spin this the way they want to. We need to start acting today to get the message out. Kokesh and his people are a tiny, tiny minority. They do not represent the vast majority of American gun owners. Remember, 80% of the American population own guns. So there are a lot of people out there we need to get the message to and tell them now is the time to stand up and say what Kokesh is doing is a dangerous and unnecessary provocation, and regardless of whether Kokesh himself is legitimate or not, the fact is this is an ideal, tailor-made situation for the government to trigger a violent confrontation used to demonize gun owners and Second Amendment supporters. And again, go back and look at what happened at Kent State when the National Guard opened fire on the peaceful protesters and killed 4 of them in an attempt to try and discourage further anti-war protests. And the government said the protesters were really armed. They started shooting first. Just demonize them, saying so-called peaceniks, they've got guns, so-called peaceniks, they trashed Disneyland. It was a non-stop smear. Now, of course, years later, it has come out that an FBI informant on that campus had a little tiny starter's pistol, and all he did was point it up in the air and pull the trigger, and that's what allowed the National Guard to open fire on the peaceful protesters. And so exactly the same thing...
Understood.
Yeah, exactly the same thing is likely to happen with this Kokesh march. The only way we can keep that march peaceful is to deny the government its propaganda value, and we've got 6 weeks to do that. And that's why we...
Hey, Mike, I just had another thought.
Yeah.
Maybe something this could be used to get some funds for RBN to keep it going. Why doesn't somebody come up with a T-shirt design and say something like, we're against this march, gun freedom advocates against this march, or something like that. And,
that's a very good idea.
Right on selling T-shirt.
Now, if you go to the top of my website where I've got this permanently ensconced petition, There are some bumper sticker designs that I put out there, and you can download the graphics and print them yourselves, or you can get them from our online store. But yeah, I'll start putting together some T-shirt designs as well, and we'll get them up there. And if RBN wants to come on board and take part in this thing, I would certainly welcome it. I'm trying to get various other pro-gun groups to link to the petition, just so we've got all these signatures in one place. The goal is to have more signatures on this petition than Kokesh has followers, which will just absolutely underscore that what he's doing does not represent the vast majority of American gun owners.
Okay, thanks for your comments.
All right, thank you. And we're going to switch over to Tom in Brooklyn. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show.
Hello,
What's on
Mike.
your mind?
Hey, Mike, remember the old saying, what would happen if someone started a war and nobody showed up?
Well, I'd certainly like to see that happen with Kokesh. I'd like him to be there with maybe two guys,
Mike.
you know.
There is no other way than just not to be there, okay? The bottom line here is if you're going to stand in harm's way, bullets and all kinds of different things really don't, your idealism does not shield you from anything. And I've heard idiots turn around and say, well, the revolution has to start somewhere. Well, it doesn't have to start in the one place in the whole country where they can use the military on you without violation of posse comitatus, because it's not even part of the United States. It's D.C.
You're absolutely right. We got to take a break for commercials. So I'm going to respond to you when we come back from these words from our sponsors.
Okay.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And responding to what Tom in Brooklyn was saying, what Kokesh is doing is not starting a revolution. If you look at the history of successful revolution, attacking the seat of power is the very last thing that you do. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and the boys didn't sail across the Atlantic and try and invade London. They fought the revolution where the oppression was being felt, in the towns and villages and all across the land of the colonies. When Castro overthrew the U.S. puppet regime of Batista, he didn't march into Havana itself until the revolution had already succeeded. And that's what's really important to keep in mind there. What's going on is the federal government understands they've pushed the American people to the edge of a revolution. And they don't want to let it just sort of emerge by itself all across the country because they can't possibly control that. So what is going on here, I think, is that Kokesh's march, and remember, Kokesh himself on Friday started calling what he's doing an armed revolution, is he's creating for the government a little tiny appearance of an armed revolt that the U.S. government is going to brutally crush down as an object lesson to the rest of the American people to stay in your slave pen, pay your taxes, breed soldiers, and don't complain. You know, remember what Lenin said, the best way to control the opposition is to lead the opposition.
Controlled opposition.
And it's exactly what's going on here. So if the government really viewed Kokesh as a threat, if they didn't want him doing this march, then an accident would have happened to him. They would have sent over 2 FBI guys at midnight to shoot him. Or they would have run him over with a police SUV and claimed his brother did it. At the very least, they could have kept Kokesh in prison on these felony charges, which wouldn't even get through the court system before July 4th. Friday, they drop all the felony charges, and Kokesh is allowed out to do the talk show circuit. The government wants him out there trying to build support for this march. It is a setup, as obvious as the one in Disneyland, as obvious as Kent State. The only difference is now we, the American people, know it. We can see it is coming.
Mike?
Yes.
Mike, I have two things to bring up. One is they're going to go across the bridge from the legal place where it's in Virginia into the illegal place, and it's the magazines are going to be loaded, the guns are going to be this, the guns are going to be all that's doing is adjusting the level of your felony conviction, okay? If you make it to the other side of the bridge, because they need a Tiananmen Square for the media, okay? Now, what I'm basically going to tell you folks is this. To all of you lemmings, okay, to all of you sheep, and to all of you gerbils that show up to go across that bridge, remember something. If your leader doesn't, if you don't follow your leader off the cliff, right, don't worry, there'll be somebody there to push you.
That's a very, very good comment to make there. The D.C. police have already announced they intend to confront Kokesh and his marchers at the city limits. And don't forget, last week the Pentagon announced that they see it as their right to intervene in any civil disturbance in the United States without waiting for the president to authorize it, without waiting for the state governors to authorize it. They have suspended posse comitatus. It is not a coincidence that the Pentagon made this statement at the same time Kokesh is trying to build up his marchers.
They have a contingent of forces at Fort Belvoir for D.C. security. Did you know that?
Yes, I do. It's,
right.
You know, it's the seat of power. It's the most militarily protected spot in the entire country. And
yeah, great place to have an armed confrontation with just the police. Because guess what? This isn't a police matter. You know, that's not a civil matter. This is insurrection. Have a great day, military. Have a nice day.
Yeah, it is. And Kokesh is leading an untrained crowd of people carrying guns into the slaughter.
It's the illusion, because it's only there for the media. These people are going to get slaughtered.
They are. There's going to be bloodshed. And
I have people in the Midwest say, well, I don't care. I'm going anyway. Yeah, I laugh at them. Go ahead. Save up your money to get locked up or killed. You know? Why don't you just, put your gun in your mouth and leave it for somebody that's a little smarter than you? You're not using your head anyway.
No, you're not. All right, Tom, we're going to let you go. We got another caller I want to get to who's been waiting very patiently. We're going to switch over to Glenn in Portland. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
First of all, I'm curious where the two-gun Kokesh picture came from.
It's one of his own public relations releases.
Okay, very good. And what do you think about the idea of a 4th of July demonstration, protest, information, a color guard bearing the flag of Iceland?
That would be a good one. You know, I've been rethinking this idea of counter-demonstrations, and I think the way it could work is if the counter-demonstrations are in a different location. So the media can't say that they're supporting Kokesh in his march, and of course the corporate media is not going to give any coverage to the counter-demonstrations, but we, the independent media, certainly will. And so if you really feel strongly that you want to get out there with placards saying, I'm a gun owner and I do not support Kokesh, I think the safest way to do that, both from physical safety and propaganda value, is to hold it in a different location than Kokesh's armed marches. Don't be giving the government or the media the means to confuse the issue and say these are really mostly Kokesh supporters. Be in a separate location where there is no question that you are there to oppose what Kokesh is doing, and I think that's really the best way to do it. Have a counter-demonstration, but have it in a different location away from Kokesh and his people. That's the only way to make it work.
Last thought. Let's locate that demonstration at that collapsed I-5 bridge in Washington State on the Skagit River near Bellingham.
Well, nobody's going to be there because that was the main West Coast route up into Canada.
A photo opportunity.
Well, I think you need to be someplace where there's a lot of people around, but it just needs to be away from Kokesh and his march. Okay, could be in a different part of Washington, D.C., different part of Virginia, someplace, a different part of the state capitals, if indeed Kokesh succeeds in getting people to march into the state capitals. But we need to get out there and we need to be visible, and we've got 6 weeks to send the message to America. Kokesh does not speak or act for the vast majority of American gun owners and Second Amendment supporters. We got 6 weeks, but the time to start doing that is right now.
I always appreciate you and your guests. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Fred in North Carolina. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just tuned in. Well, it's a little bit analog to 911. Do you believe that the planes were the cause that the buildings collapsed? With all the information at hand, I don't think Kokesh or the Patriots are going to cause a revolution. They don't have to. They only have to be the reason why the Constitution will be suspended in case of riots.
That's exactly my point. It doesn't matter whether Kokesh himself is legitimate or part of the plot. The government will send in agent provocateurs to make sure it turns into the kind of incident that the media and government can use to demonize guns and gun owners and patriots Obama's already out there screaming about how the internet is the cause of domestic terrorism. They're clearly afraid right now, and Obama is desperate for some way to distract the public from Benghazi Gate, IRS Gate, DOJ Gate, and July 4th is only 6 weeks away, and I think he's putting all of his propaganda eggs in this one particular basket. And so again, it doesn't matter if Kokesh and his marchers are really hoping for this to be simply a peaceful demonstration. The government can use agent provocateurs to turn it into an ugly incident that will serve the government's propaganda purposes. Again, that riot at Disneyland started out as a peaceful anti-war march on Harbor Boulevard, but the agent provocateurs inside the group turned it into this ruckus that was used to discredit the anti-war movement, which with the end result that 60,000 Americans and who knows how many Vietnamese were killed in this war to make companies like General Dynamics and Bell Helicopter rich.
Oh, yeah, of course. But the point is, and I'm trying to make this, he doesn't need any patriots. There could only be agent provocateurs there.
No, I'm sure he's actually going to get some well-meaning people who think this is a good idea. The useful idiots will join along, but it's only going to take a handful of these agent provocateurs to cause a ruckus.
Well, it only has to be looking like a riot, and that's enough.
Yeah, that's it. They're going to make it look like it was a real armed revolution, a little tiny one that they can stamp down on to send a message to the rest of America. Don't even think about standing up and having an armed revolt, or we will do the same to you. And they don't even have to have agent provocateurs within Kokesh's marchers. They just have some snipers located nearby to pop a couple of cops, and everything will just go crazy from there.
That would be a reasonable, logical consequence of that all. One more thing. I do notice that there is a line that is directly being drawn between Schumer, Feinstein, Kokesh, and I can't help but seeing that. It's all coming from the same direction.
Well, I'm not really sure if that is a valid link or not. I do know that Kokesh's supporters have fallen back on the old canard of anti-Semitism to try and defend him, which basically means we're making valid arguments against Kokesh and how his provocation is actually going to work against gun owners, work against patriots, work against Americans and the Constitution, even work against libertarianism. But they come back and say, oh, the only reason you're opposed to Kokesh is he's Jewish and you're a known Jew hater and anti-Semite, so please shut up. And, of course, I'm not going to shut up because, again, as that member of the Knesset told to Amy Goodman over at Democracy Now!, it's just a trick to shut people up. And they're thrashing around trying to find some way to keep this thing running. They've had a couple of major PR setbacks. The revelation that Kokesh had it on his own Facebook page that he worked for Obama was one. The fact that the Free Adam Kokesh website was registered as a domain 6 days before his drug arrest, which now all those charges have been dropped and he's walking free. And even if you accept the spin that Free Adam Kokesh was started up as a website ahead of July 4th, that only reinforces the idea that Kokesh is planning to provoke a confrontation. And it's a classic COINTELPRO style setup. Alrighty, so let's move on along here. We are in the Memorial Day weekend. And this is where all the money junkies pretend to be concerned about all those hundreds of millions of human beings that have died in these wars to protect the glories of private central banking. Story in the corporate media talking about the price gouging at the gas pump. This is the official start of the summer vacation season, and because more and more people are driving in order to stay off the airlines and the crotch groping and the rest of it, gas prices traditionally go up this weekend and stay up through the summer holidays because they got you. You got to buy gas from somebody, and they're going to make a lot of money. Now, interestingly enough, the corporate media is trying to claim that there's a study showing that flyer satisfaction on the airlines is now at a 7-year high, despite all the additional fees that are being imposed. And they're saying that travelers understand that if you want to take a carry-on, or you want the little headset to listen to the movie, or if you want a little extra legroom, that you should pay for it. And the only people who are going to be okay with that really are the money junkies who can afford that kind of luxurious travel. But I don't know anybody who's satisfied with airline travel right now. I actually hate it. I used to love to fly. I'm old enough to remember when you went flying on one of the carriers like Pan Am, When you'd walk on board, there was leg room, the seats were comfortable, they weren't grabbing your crotch and going through your luggage and stealing stuff or dropping your laptops, not that we had laptops back then. You'd get this little plastic case with the airline logo on it, and inside would be all kinds of packages of smoked almonds. There'd be a little blindfold if it was a long flight, little foot warmers, all kinds of promotional materials that you did not pay extra for. And this idea of just gouging people for every single penny, no. Flyer satisfaction is not at a 7-year high. This is just paid advertising for the airlines to try and say, come on back and use our airlines during the summer. Really, we're a lot nicer than we used to be. I don't think so. There's no way the airlines are going to be nicer as long as TSA is there abusing everybody who wants to get on an aircraft. It just it's not believable that flyer satisfaction is at a 7-year high. Not right now, especially with all the added fees. I think I mentioned this before when I took Claire back to the World Choir Games in Cincinnati last summer. Our checked luggage was 1 pound over the limit for which they wanted to charge me $90. And so I took my camera monopod out of the checked luggage and I shoved it into my carry-on, whereupon I promptly got hassled by TSA because the monopod could be used as a weapon. No, there's no flyer satisfaction out there. It's just paid propaganda to get people to come back to the airlines and be abused all over again. Quick phone call here, Danny in South Carolina. Aloha, Danny. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. Just a quick comment. I think we're taking it too seriously. I think everyone should appear at the bridge with a Nerf gun or a cardboard gun and 12 raw eggs, walk across the bridge, go to Capitol Hill, pelt the White House with eggs, turn around, and go home.
Well, it sounds really good, but again, anybody showing up to march with Kokesh's marchers becomes a target. They become another body that the corporate media can claim supports Kokesh and his armed revolution, which is what he himself is now calling it as of last Friday. And
let's turn it into an egg revolution.
Well, if you want to have an egg revolution, I would say have it as a separate, distinct march, not with Kokesh, not in the same time and place. Again, you really can't throw an egg all the way from that outside fence to the White House itself. Even your star baseball pitchers can't make that. There's a huge, huge surrounding space around the White House for that very reason, so that you can't throw eggs or anything else like that. So we're going to let you go. We're coming up on a commercial break here, and we're about to wrap up our Memorial Day show with some other thing. Now, getting back to the gun grabber issue here, an interesting story came out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain, where a reporter for Mother Jones was able to buy all of the parts to build his own AK-47 and assemble the gun and go out and test shoot it in the Mojave Desert, and it's all entirely legal. That you can buy the parts for your guns and just make them. If you are a black powder enthusiast, like myself, making your own guns is kind of a fun hobby. And if you know what you're doing, they are just very effective weapons, certainly for home defense. All righty. So anyway, let's see. Getting on back here. Did you know that the federal private prison population has grown by more than 7 times in the last 10 years? We have more people in our prisons, a higher per capita prison population than any other industrialized nation. Why? Because the private prisons make money off of it, and they make money off the prisoners in those prison factory businesses that take jobs away from law-abiding citizens. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, welcome back to the show, and we're finishing up here before we head on off on our Memorial Day observances, which is basically staying at home, and I got to clean my office today. Couple of stories we're going to wrap up with. Interesting little study came from the Canadian Neurosciences meeting. They just finished their big convention here for 2013 and basically came out with the conclusion that high fructose corn syrup is actually addictive. That when you are ingesting it on a regular basis and you try and stop, you will literally go through withdrawal symptoms. You certainly don't get that with regular sugars, cane sugar and beet sugar. But yeah, these food manufacturers, they love addictive chemicals in the food. Keep you coming back, guzzling the sodas, eating the candy bars. And they were trying to claim that it was just like regular sugar. They wanted to rename it as corn sugar, and huge advertising campaign that fell flat on its face. Now they're trying to rename aspartame as amino sweet and claim it's a natural sweetener. It isn't. Before it was legalized for use as a sweetener, it was classed as a biological weapon because of the damage it can cause to your brain. Now, a little story I want to touch on here, just because it's current events here. Apparently, there's a story about this Alaska Airlines flight was descending into Portland, Oregon, and an individual on the flight made some very bizarre statements. Nobody will say what he was saying, but he was trying to open the door, the cabin door. And, you know, everybody's a hero for stopping him and all the rest of it. But I wanted to point something out. For those of you who still travel on the airlines, when the aircraft is at altitude, when it's above 8,000 feet, you can't open those doors. Even if you get past all the locking mechanisms on there and get the latch over to the open position, the door is going to stay exactly where it is because it's held in place by pressure. Those doors open inward, and the interior of the plane is at a high pressure relative to the outside. There's literally tons of air pressure keeping that door sealed where it is. Now, once you're below 8,000 feet, it's a different story. But if you're below 8,000 feet and somebody opens the door, nothing's going to happen. There'll be a lot of wind in the cabin. It's not going to destroy the aircraft. It's not going to suck people out or anything like that. So it's weird this guy did it. Maybe he was on an SSRI reaction. We don't really know. But in point of fact, despite what movies and television and corporate media tell you, when you're in an airplane, a passenger jet at 35,000 feet, you cannot open those doors. The cabin pressure makes it impossible to do. Just wanted to kind of get that out there. All right, we're coming up on the end of the show, and again, I'm going to be making this a big point of my show from now through July 4th, and I know you're going to get sick of hearing me talk about it, but Adam Kokesh and his call for an armed revolution in D.C. and the state capitals on July 4th, and that's what Kokesh is calling it now, as of last Friday, is a setup. The Obama administration wants to trigger a small revolution now that they can put down brutally to suspend the Constitution, to bring about martial law, to prevent a larger general revolution down the road. Plus, Obama needs to distract everybody from Benghazi Gate, IRS Gate, DOJ Gate. This is a setup. Do not be suckered into it. And on that note, have a good Memorial Day. Please take a moment to think about all those people who have been killed in these wars for the private central banks. And we'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Aloha, America.